Our first speaker is Dr. Louise Shaper, who's CEO of the Health Informatics Society of Australia. Louise trained as an occupational therapist, is a world leader in allied health informatics and intimately connected with the role of informatics in e-health and health reform, and has been part of NETA's, the National E-Health Transition Authority's clinical lead team. I'm really grateful to hear there's still a clinical lead team. I'm told there was none left as of last week, but it's great to hear there's still some there. Could you please welcome Louise Shaper?
So the word arcane is often used as a synonym for archaic, old-fashioned, but it actually means something entirely different. So it means that it's knowledge that is understood by few, mysterious or secret. The phrase knowledge is power is widely attributed to Sir Francis Bacon, but Sir Francis didn't say that. What he said instead, and it was supposed to show on my slides, so let me see if it's there. I don't think it is, so you're going to have to bear with my, I wasn't schooled in Latin, but he didn't say knowledge is power. What he actually said is scientia potentia est, or a Latin aphorism often claimed to mean organised knowledge is power. Now, it was understood that there is power in knowledge and that it was politically wise that knowledge remained with the few, those who sought to create and maintain their power. The Bible was originally written in Greek, well, the New Testament was, and the original Hebrew in the Old Testament. But in the Dark and Middle Ages, the Bible was trapped in only Latin, and it stayed that way for a millennia. Purposefully, commoners were not taught how to read or even speak Latin. Formal education was not widespread, and much scholarly knowledge was trapped in Latin and behind church walls. Possession of the Bible in languages other than Latin was deemed illegal by the Roman Church, and people were actually executed for possessing or teaching the Bible in languages other than Latin. Technology leads us to the democratisation of knowledge. It was the invention of the printing press in 1452 that the written word could be widely distributed. And interestingly, the first book that was printed was Gutenberg's Latin Vulgate version of the Bible. When we talk about healthcare, about your health and the health and well-being of those you love and care about, we frame science in a very personal way. So as you heard, I'm clinically trained. I trained as an occupational therapist. I also have an honours degree in occupational therapy. I'm a trained academic and I have a PhD in information systems. But the world I live in now is one of e-health and health informatics. And what that means is basically that I care about improving health and the healthcare system. I care about making sure that clinicians and consumers have access to health information so that they can work together to make the best decisions. For you and your healthcare professionals to make the best decisions about you and to maintain your health and well-being requires two categories of information, broadly speaking. They are scientific-based health information so that we can practice evidence-based practice, and we also require information that is specific to you. It's 2013. The practice of medicine, what we know about how the human body works and what it needs to stay healthy and how to treat illness is very advanced since the invention of the printing press. But how we manage the information of healthcare hasn't advanced anywhere near as much. Healthcare information is still recorded in bits of paper, scattered disparately in various physical forms with very little mechanisms to bring it all together. And the quality of that information is also, unfortunately, very poor. So let's have a look at these two categories of information needed to maintain well-being. So for clinical scientific-based information, first we have to do research. We have to get the funding. So I know I'm talking probably to a lot of academics here, so you have to get the funding first, very importantly, and then you do your research. And then hopefully you get it published. Then other people need to do research as well and replicate your results, the very essence of the scientific method. That information must be synthesised, and then it becomes, hopefully, a clinical practice guideline. And then finally, we need to use those clinical practice guidelines to change our clinical practice. But that can take a while. Dr. Norman Swan has already mentioned a couple of examples, and here's another one. Streptokinase, which is a clot buster used in heart attacks. It took 18 years from the publication of the paper to normal daily use. 18 years. And it's not just the time delay in getting research into practice. We also have a problem in that widely practiced medical procedures may be useless or even cause harm. And a study that was actually on the health report recently showed that 40% of current medical practices were found to offer no benefits. There was a study done in the New England Journal of Medicine. Well, I'm sorry, it was published elsewhere, but it was they actually reviewed 10 years' worth of papers in the New England Journal of Medicine, and that was the result that they found. And even, just as concerning, I think, aside from the 40%, was that 20% was inconclusive. There was only about 38% that was actually conclusive. So think about it. When you go to your doctor and other people in your healthcare team, and they say, yes, take this or do this procedure or here's the treatment we're going to do, often we ask questions of ourselves and of the doctors of, well, how do I do that? And how does that mechanism actually work? We don't actually ask, does the information that they're giving us does it work at all? So with your own healthcare information, have a think about it. Have a think about the healthcare information of those people that you know, that you love. Some of you might have personal responsibility for. Where does that information live? Who has access to it? Who manages it? Who understands it? And who owns it? Let me tell you about 3 patients. So firstly, Regina. Regina, her husband was diagnosed with stage 4 kidney cancer. When you get a diagnosis of stage 4 kidney cancer, it's not good. The rates of survival after that are very, very low. And her husband unfortunately died. But after his death and what she learned about the healthcare system and how poorly information is managed in the healthcare system, she has become a world-leading advocate for patient access to their own healthcare information. This is Dave. Dave had stage 4 kidney cancer diagnosis as well. And Dave gives a TED talk, which I suggest you have a Google for it. E-Patient Dave, he calls himself. It's a really cool talk. And Dave will be visiting Australia next year, which is great. But what did he do with his stage 4 kidney cancer diagnosis, which had metastasised throughout his body? He, at his age, learnt about social media. And he went out through social media channels. He learned about Twitter, he learned about Facebook, and he told everybody he could that he was looking for as much information as he could about stage 4 kidney cancer. He wanted to make his daughter's wedding. Well, Dave is still with us because through those social media research that he did, he came across somebody who was trialling a drug. They put that in with his GP. They trialled that drug with Dave, and it actually worked. So, and Dave credits his survival thanks to social media. And here's Salvatore. Salvatore is, I think, 39 years old, had a brain tumour. And, when you discover you've got a brain tumour, it's not good news, of course. And all of the things, I think, all the grief and everything. But then he also found out about, again, how the healthcare system worked, and it wasn't what he was expecting. So he was a bit of an IT geek, and he gets online and he puts every single bit of information about himself, about his diagnoses, online. And he says he builds a website, and it's called Open Cancer Cure. And he posts everything up there and says, please, I don't want to die. I don't want other people to die of this. Let's see if we can together come up with a cure. He got over 500,000 hits of information. Now, sure, some of them were, people saying, just eat broccoli, you'll be fine, do some meditation. And, that's fine. But he also got, world-leading neurosurgeons and world-leading oncologists contact him. And the treatment plan that his doctor came up with was based on a synthesis of all of that information. And now he's started a worldwide movement. And that's a question for you. How do you build a business case for healthcare where you've got a patient coming to you, maybe with a laptop, maybe with a Twitter stream saying, look, I'm not a doctor, I don't have this medical knowledge, but I have almost 500,000 pieces of information and I want your help in helping me decipher this so that we can come up with the best treatment plan for me. The days of scientific medical knowledge being strictly reserved for the few is not behind us entirely, but soon it will be removed entirely from behind walls that were once made of language and of literal stone walls that are now virtual walls in the form of paywalls. Revolutionaries such as Dave, Regina and Salvatore show how technology enables the democratisation of healthcare knowledge, by giving access to information, sharing of information. Social media gives people a voice that don't normally have one. It gives them a way to create communities and to organise. Another fabulous example of this is Patients Like Me, which didn't show up on that slide, but have a Google for it, Patients Like Me. It's an online community. Now, it's going to be difficult. I'm asking for a show of hands here. How many of you know that over 12 months ago, the federal government launched the Personally Controlled Electronic Health Record, which enables your health information to be online if you choose to have it there, that only you can not only access it, but you can give control to who else can? How many people know about that and are using it? I'm in an informed audience. Nice. Okay, then. So there was for those of you in the front, there was quite a few hands up then. Very nice. Okay, a recent global study by Accenture found that the majority of Australian doctors, though, say that sharing health records electronically has a positive effect on reducing medical errors and improving the quality of diagnostic and treatment decisions, but they were not in favour of allowing patients to have full access to their own records. I'm just going to leave that with you. So we still have a bit to go if we want open data. So look, technology is enabling the democratisation of knowledge. It's very, very promising, but we're only the beginning. And open data, hashtag open data, I think is the future. And here is my proposition, that data should be publicly available with few caveats. Thanks everyone for your time.
Thanks, Louise. I encourage you to clap loudly, but that's not going to make a difference in the end. It's only going to be your vote. Andrew Cuthbertson's our next speaker. Andrew is the Chief Scientific Officer of CSL Limited, a Melbourne-based pharmaceutical company. He runs a group of 800 researchers. He's an immunologist by training, having worked both with Walter and Eliza Hall and the Howard Florey Institute before he went to CSL in 1997. And Andrew's focus in terms of public available data is going to be on clinical trials, which any of you who know has been a battlefield in the last 2 or 3 years, particularly over the flu drug Tamiflu. I'm not quite sure whether Andrew's going to address that issue, but if he's not, I'll certainly bring it up in the panel. Please welcome Andrew.
Thanks very much, Norman. And I was about to say it's great to see everyone here, but I can't see anything out there. But I assume there is an audience, which is great. As Norman said, I want to talk about a particular subset of big data in healthcare, which are formally gathered clinical trial data. And I have a very personal interest in this. CSL, as Norman mentioned, is an international company, but its headquarters is here in the same suburb, Parkville, as the University of Melbourne. And we're currently doing 37 clinical trials in 45 countries around the world, about 1,200 sites, and literally thousands of individuals involved. So we have a big interest in this, and I would strongly suggest that we want clinical trials, properly conducted clinical trials done in Australia. We get a lot of benefits as a country from having these activities here in Australia. And to do that, it's really important that people volunteer. And that's the way the system works. And the contention today is that more use could be made of this currently private clinical trial data to benefit public health. And one of my mentors, John Matthews, said just recently, and I think he put it well, that we could use the informational and biological byproducts of clinical trials for public benefit and to improve healthcare practice. And I agree that that's true. So why do we assemble these data sets in the first place? Well, the primary reason is that, and it's mainly companies, design and fund clinical trials with a lot of input from regulatory agencies around the world to endeavour to show safety and efficacy of new medicines and to seek licensure of those medicines in different parts of the world. And the point is that John Matthews and others would strongly make is that in addition, this data speaks to the disease. It even speaks with placebo and control groups to just a lot of biological and medical parameters about people in the community. And there's an interesting ownership flow here, ownership flow of the information from the patient, who clearly owns it in the first place, but who gives informed consent for us to study a particular disease. And the data is then de-identified, if that's a word. It's aggregated, and it then forms the basis of a dialogue between the company and the regulatory agency over the evidence and the pros and cons of making this new medicine available to the community. And it's essentially a risk-benefit discussion with the agency. And there is a level of disclosure already through things like websites like clinicaltrials.gov, which is a US NIH website, publication in peer-reviewed journals and so forth, but not general public availability, and that's what we're discussing in this short talk. So why not dump the data on the internet? And I assure you I've had heated discussions with colleagues and otherwise intelligent people who say you should just get it out there and let the public decide. And I'm not necessarily against the concept. I would like tonight to give you just two very real examples as to why a level of caution is required, and particularly where we're talking about what we call patient-level data. So this is the data applying to real live individuals. So the two quick examples I want to give you are really at two ends of the spectrum. The first is a clinical trial that we're conducting at CSL at the moment in a nasty, rare, chronic neurological condition that we think can be treated by one of our medicines. This condition is so rare that we are opening more clinical trial sites than we anticipate enrolling patients. So the number of patients per site statistically is less than one. We have to do that to get the 50 or 60 patients that we have agreed with the regulatory agencies we need to show safety and efficacy. Now, those of you who are aware of the power of cross-analysis with databases, really simple. It would not be difficult to easily identify all of the individuals in this trial and their family members and their insurance status and so forth. So, and I've also had good debates with friends and colleagues about access to things like Medicare database, PBS database, and clearly with rare conditions, which are a special case, the ability to cross-reference the data from this clinical trial with those sort of databases would make identification of the actual individuals very easy, and it's certainly not what they bought into when they gave informed consent, and they would not welcome us doing that to them. The second quick example I want to give is at the other end of the scale. This is a big trial of a common condition of heart attacks. So it's a study we're setting up. We're in the process of debating with the regulatory agencies, the size and the power and the control groups and so forth. But in this case, the team working on this project tell me that we are planning to generate a database of about 2.4 million data points from the study. This is only a modest study. It's a 1,200 patient study. There are a lot bigger studies, but I'm talking about this because it's real and I know about it and I'm confident of the numbers. But so 2.4 million data points, 16,000 tables of treatment effects. My point here is that if you wanted to and you were either not skilled in the art or you actually had a malignant intent, you can go through 2.4 million data points and find anything you like. And you can make a statement which is not true, but you could make the statement from cherry picking through this massive data set that you can make connections between those data points which are invalid, but you could say the observation was supported by data. So my conclusion is, and this is certainly supported by, as Norman mentioned, this is a very hot topic with particularly the European Medicines Agency, the European regulator, prominent journals around the world. The New York Times has bought into it. GSK, one of the big pharmaceutical companies, is in the middle of this debate. I do agree that privately held clinical trial data should be made available to a broader community of legitimate, responsible researchers. And through that means, I think we can improve public health outcomes. And I think that would be a really positive thing. And I'm a great optimist about our future ability to do this. But we need to make sure we respect patients' privacy and the confidentiality that they've given us. And we have to ensure the integrity of the data analysis. My final point would be a plea, and I did speak to Glenn Davis earlier, and he sort of rolled his eyes because I'm sure one observation is the medical courses around the world and in Australia are full to the bursting point. Everyone has pet things that they'd like to include in the medical course or have a higher profile, but I would suggest as a serious point that a strong grounding in biostatistics and the ability to understand and comprehend and intelligently interpret data is perhaps as important to the modern medical student as the study of anatomy. And it's probably right up there with compassion as some of the most important foundations for modern medical education. Thank you.
A compassionate statistician. We'll work on that idea, Andrew. Just a little bit of cognitive dissonance there, but I'm sure it will come through. So, clinical trial data should be worked harder, but how much harder should it be worked? We'll work Andrew harder in the panel discussion on that topic, which is coming shortly. David Caroli is Professor of Climate Science in the School of Earth Sciences in the ARC Centre of Excellence on Climate System Science at the University of Melbourne. Internationally recognised authority in climate change, climate variability, greenhouse, ozone layer depletion, the El Nino Southern Oscillation, and was heavily involved in the fourth assessment report of the IPCC, the International Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, so beloved of many politicians in Australia, and sits on many government groups and also sits on the advocacy group, the Wentworth Group of Concerned Scientists. Please welcome David Caroli.
Thank you very much, Norman. And you've already talked a little bit about climate change. And one of the things that climate scientists sometimes do is try and hide behind barriers to prevent public engagement. And one of the things that I thought might be appropriate for me to do is not stand behind this barrier, but actually move out into the open. But there's no need for me to hide behind this. I am a climate scientist. I am involved in communicating climate change science a lot. But climate change science is not a new subject. It's something that we've actually known about, that increasing carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere from burning fossil fuels are likely to cause major impacts on the climate system for more than 110 years. The first scientific paper on this was published in 1896. And it predicted warming, not this century, but in 200 years. And yes, we've burnt more coal, more oil, more natural gas than this person, Arrhenius, had anticipated. Climate change is happening. And I got involved, I'm going to tell you my own story. I got involved in studying climate variability, and one of my graduate students said he needed to remove the trends in the data. He was a statistician. He was interested in analysing the data. He had to remove the trends. And I said, well, maybe we should look at these trends in the temperature data from the Southern Hemisphere just to see whether they were consistent or not, because I was going to be a really clever scientist. I was going to show that these data were not consistent with what other people had been saying about the response to increasing greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. We analysed the data, we looked harder and harder, and the harder we looked, we could not find anything which was inconsistent with the response of the atmosphere to increasing greenhouse gases. We showed that it was inconsistent with the response to increases in sunlight from the sun. We showed it was inconsistent with natural variability, but it was exactly consistent with climate responses to human-caused emissions of greenhouse gases. That was published 27 years ago. And since then, I've been working on causes of climate change as well as its variability. And 2 years afterwards, in 1988, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was set up to undertake assessments of climate change science. I attended one of the very first meetings, but I wasn't a lead author. I was too busy in Australia doing my own science to get involved in science assessments. But this panel was set up by the United Nations to undertake comprehensive assessments of climate change science, to communicate that, but it was told it could not make any recommendations. The science had to be policy relevant, but policy neutral. And since that time, it has prepared 4 assessments, comprehensive assessments, more volumes than the Yellow Pages, but the same font. The next assessment report comes out, first volume, the end of this month. It's involved more than 200 authors, as well as more than 2,000 reviewers. It is the most comprehensive assessment process of any science field. And the conclusions in this report that will come out in the end of this month, I know, but I'm not allowed to tell you, but they're very similar to the last set of conclusions 5 years ago, just with much higher confidence. And the set of conclusions is, yes, the climate has warmed over the last 100 years. Most of that warming is due to the increase in greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere. There will be benefits, but many adverse impacts from that climate change and continued emissions of greenhouse gases from burning fossil fuels, from land clearing and industrial activity will cause more warming. And the changes in the climate system will last for a millennium, for more than 1,000 years. As soon as action on climate change science was planned and being undertaken in other countries, because the observational data from climate change, because the model simulation data is publicly available, it was open for the misinterpretation that Andrew was talking about. And responding to climate change will likely impact society, will impact communities, will impact industries. In much the same way, but in very different ways, that climate change itself will impact society, will impact communities, will impact the environment in which we live, and will impact industries. And the choice is the lesser of two evils. Except that when some industries realised that their investment in fossil fuels or in land clearing or in industries that generate greenhouse gases was going to be affected by controls on these emissions, they decided that rather than fighting the controls, let's fight the science. In much the same way as other issues, public issues, have led to misrepresentation of the science. Misrepresentation of climate change science has become a game for the media. It's become a game for many commentators. 97% of peer-reviewed climate science articles over the last 5 years agree that the climate system is warming, and most of that warming is due to increasing greenhouse gases. If you ask the public through surveys, they generally come up with the majority agrees. But it's 55 to 60% agree with those conclusions, not the 97% that scientists agree. So then the question becomes, is the misrepresentation of science in the media, is the misrepresentation of science by commentators, by politicians, by many other groups, affecting that public understanding? It is clear there is plenty of information from the science, but misrepresentation is likely to have an impact. I'm hopeful if we do this, no, we do that. I am not the first scientist who's experienced misrepresentation. This is a great quote, not from the first edition of Origin of Species, but in fact from the 6th edition of Origin of Species. Great is the power of steady misrepresentation. But the history of science shows that fortunately this power does not long endure. I think Darwin was an optimist. Because inaction in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions is making a decision to continue emissions as they are, which is making a decision to make climate change worse. If we want to respond to climate change, we don't need more science information. We need to be able to better communicate it. We need psychologists to understand human behaviour. We need economists to persuade business that action to reduce climate change is dramatically cheaper, less expensive than the costs that we will experience due to climate change itself. We also need support from business and community leaders. And so my idea, if it comes up, is that science alone is not enough to combat the misrepresentation, to overcome the vested interests that are misleading climate change science. We need the support of psychologists, we need the support of economists, and as well we need you as community and business leaders. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Keep those tweets coming, #UOMFOI, and join the discussion in a moment or two after we hear from Gerald Rector, who is CEO of the Victorian Health Promotion Foundation, comes to that known as Vic Health, comes with an extensive set of experiences in working with government and the not-for-profit sectors, not just in health, but in the arts as well, having even founded a young person's dance theatre. Please welcome Gerald Rector.
It's lovely to be here tonight, and I just would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to elders past and present, and to any Indigenous Australians that may be here tonight. At Vic Health, we've been reflecting upon the time we live in, and we know that in this connected age, the race, pace, and depth of change has revolutionised forever the way that we communicate. With so many people waving the flag today, sustaining that evidence can slip and slither out of sight in just an instant. In this digital age, there's no shortage of information or champions prepared to fly the flag to support their best ideas. So how do organisations like Vic Health use their extensive expertise, networks and global reach to value add, to ensure that people are accessing the right information in the right way? Well, this is the connected age. 5 or 6 years ago, who had used an app, Twittered, or Googled as much as you are right now during this lecture tonight? Technology is absolutely everywhere, in our industries and business, in almost every aspect of our daily lives. There are now 2.7 billion internet users worldwide, 39% of the world's population, and the ever-available mobile phone has become the primary window for the internet for most of us all the time. Now, there's actually an unsettling thought. You are only one email away from 39% of the world's population. And connection is pervasive. A recent report from Ericsson showed that almost 40% of global smartphone users habitually use their phone before they got out of bed in the morning. The only point during the day when smartphone usage dips significantly on a global scale is dinner time. Love it or hate it, social media has changed forever the way we communicate and the way that we do business, and Louise talked about that in her talk. We are watching global connection on a scale so great it is impossible to ignore. And it's hard to believe that Facebook only started in 2004 and Twitter in 2006. With populism 1980s style, we were in the driver's seat, amassing the evidence and determining how and when it would be used, and also how it would be delivered. People certainly were very successfully waving the flag back 25 years ago when Vic Health was established as a part of the Tobacco Act of 1987. It was the single most important lobby in Australia's history at the time, made up of many non-political citizens who were encouraged to express their views on public health issues, which had been dominated for decades by the vested interests of the tobacco industry. Lobby control was newsworthy, attributable deaths were climbing, and the public was beginning to see the death toll for itself as doctors increasingly spread the message to patients. At last, the credibility of the health groups triumphed, and what had once been a respected industry came to be seen as something between a maverick and a pariah. As Norman said in his introduction, the fact that the tobacco industry just last week in Thailand opposed the Thailand government, they actually put an injunction, a High Court injunction, to stop the Thailand government introducing graphic labels on health warning, graphic health label warnings on tobacco products, means we know that it's successful if they're screaming that loudly. So this was populist politics 1980s style, policy making informed by evidence. Information for action. Then, as now, knowledge is power, information is liberating, and education is the premise of progress. But today, knowledge has been unleashed from the previous constraints of time, location, and expertise. This is the era of co-creation. We can kick-start conversations where individuals collaborate with us to empower themselves at their own pace and in their own space. Today, anyone can contribute to the world's store of knowledge on health issues, and others will build on the foundation using the plethora of collaboration and social networking tools available to them. This is a world in which consumers of goods and consumers of information have unprecedented influence and control. Creating and sharing knowledge is no longer enough. The world no longer cares what you know because they can find everything on Google. The world only cares about, will listen to, and will pay for what you can do with what you know. Making sense of the stats, pulling together the ideas, and making the connections. And it's no longer enough for health promotion agencies like Vic Health to ask, what are we good at? Or what do we think is right? We must also ask, what do our stakeholders, government, businesses large and small, people in the biggest cities and the smallest towns, young people, old people, people with disabilities, what do they need and want? And perhaps more accurately, what do they think they need and want now? Because in this information age, decision cycles are getting shorter and shorter as people and organisations react more quickly to the many triggers they are exposed to across the multiple platforms. Of course, there are risks. We're no longer the ones in control of the evidence base, but think of the opportunities, and that's what we're doing at Vic Health. This is communication on a global scale. This is interactive communication, and this is individualised, engaged communication. The current mantra is listen to the people, and of course there's a real risk that this decision-making is done by pop poll, decision-making by the loudest voices, which increasingly means those most adept at manipulating new media. But social media can also bring to health promotion quite literally a whole world of opportunities. We can wave a very big flag to very many people all over the globe. And more importantly, thanks to the wonders of analytics, and that's the discovery of communication and the meaningful patterns of data, we can segment, target, predict, and describe in ways never imagined before. Applying this to some of Vic Health's current problems, we know that violence against women is the biggest contributor to ill health in women aged between 15 and 44 years of age. Collecting the data on the impact of violence against women suggests that well over a third of women, that's 40%, have experienced physical or sexual violence. This is powerful data, and it enables Vic Health to lead further work. And over time, build the knowledge to a point where it can, and if you saw the Herald Sun today, it's a great example of that it is becoming a public health issue that will regularly capture the headlines and capture the interests of individuals. Through the power of social media, we can target communities, Indigenous, culturally and linguistically diverse communities, regional, urban, or particular age groups. New media gives us high quality and cost-effective business intelligence, client relationship management support, and it is the catalyst for global access to research data and collaboration. Through crowdsourcing, we can promulgate services, ideas and inputs from an audience size we could have only dreamed about in the past. And importantly, we can also target the outcomes. Through the power of the cloud, we can kickstart conversations amongst multiple audiences, accessible anywhere, anytime, and synchronised on multiple personal devices. Vic Health has the opportunity to engage online, and so do all of we, to make health promotion relevant, a two-way conversation that moves on from just telling people what to do to providing a platform that gives the opportunity to actively contribute to their own health literacy. We have an opportunity to make health promotion everyone's business, using technology to reach the general population and support community action, building people's knowledge and understanding so that the healthy choice becomes the easy choice. Vic Health's value add is not in our control over the evidence, but in the tools that we can give people to improve their own health literacy. And this is my idea. In health promotion 21st century style, creating and sharing knowledge is no longer enough to promote healthy lifestyles. We need to kickstart conversations and provide people with the tools to actively collaborate with us. Thank you.
And can I invite our panellists back to the stage for our discussion? Can we have the house lights up, please, fully, so that we can see when you want to join in the conversation? We're not going to wait till the end. Just come in when you feel you want to make a comment or ask a question or challenge the audience, challenge the speakers on their comments. So one take on what you said, Gerald, is that is anarchy. We're going to be so liberal in our attitude towards information that it's just, there's no room for leadership anymore. Just let it go out.
I guess that idea for me speaks to the notion of distributed leadership. And distributed leadership is the idea that anybody can contribute to information and take a leadership role on. And I think probably one of the best examples of distributed leadership in the internet age or in the social media stage world is Wikipedia. So Wikipedia is a place, as you know, where anybody can put up information, but it still has a hierarchy that sits alongside it that allows the information to be as accurate as possible. So I don't think it is the extreme, Norman, of anarchy. I think that when you are speaking about information online, that leadership exists and that hierarchies still exist along the side. And I think we saw that also through Louise's talk when she mentioned about, and I can't remember which was your last patient that you talked about, but when he put the call out for 500,000 pieces of information came back to help him diagnose his brain tumour, he then went to his professional and said, here's all this information, help me find a way through it. But he had all that information in his hands, and that was what was really exciting.
And the heart sank of the health professional when he walked in with his 500,000
rolled.
pieces
his eyes
of
rolled.
information. Just raise your hand if you want to say something, and one of our couriers, microphone couriers, will come to you. David, one of the tweets here is I want a debate between Professor David Caroli and Tony Abbott.
Well, you know, the leader of the opposition has ensured that the coalition...
You're talking about Kevin Rudd now, are you? Sorry.
The leader of the coalition and in fact, the leaders of all the political parties in federal parliament say they accept the science of climate change, and all have commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Unfortunately, none except the Greens have emission reduction commitments that are large enough to meet what would be considered by many people Australia's fair share in greenhouse gas emission reductions. Australians, the people in the audience here, and myself, all have, over the past 10 years, the highest greenhouse gas emissions per capita of any developed country in the world. So we're contributing a disproportionately large amount to the problem of climate change, not only for us, but for the rest of the world. And unfortunately, Australia has also been identified as a developed country most at risk from the adverse impacts of climate change. So I haven't had a chance to have a discussion with Tony Abbott. I'm not sure that I will in the foreseeable future.
Could we have a microphone down at the front here, please? But you know, your plea is bring in the economists, bring in the business leaders to help us out. But haven't you got yourselves to blame? You've just been a crowd of wimps over the years. And even you started your presentation with the word likely. I mean, you're your own worst enemies, climate change scientists.
That's probably correct.
You mean it's likely to be correct?
But I have engaged substantially with some interesting people. Alan Jones survived an interaction with me. I think I almost survived an interaction with Alan Jones. And after 30 minutes, he gave me 3 minutes uninterrupted, which was amazing for Alan Jones.
But seriously, there's equivocation in the IPCC reports, which is jumped upon by industry who prey on doubt. Gerald knows all about this very well. That as soon as you raise something, they say, well, there's doubt about the data. Scientists are equivocating here.
What the IPCC does is talk about results in terms of climate change science, in terms of their confidence. And it has a number of very high confidence statements. All the ones that I talked about, the warming of the climate system, the links to increasing greenhouse gases, the changes in the future, and the impacts are all very high confidence statements. So I would have said we aren't equivocating on those. Those conclusions are beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right. You're saying that. Are they saying that?
Yes.
Good. Yes. If you could introduce yourself, that would be great.
Les Pickett from Club Melbourne. I've got a question for Andrew. Andrew, you were talking about making clinical research public and the various issues. We're already inundated by commercial organisations flogging us to death with their advertising on borrowed research that assumes and tells us this has been done on their products in real life trials, and we know damn well it hasn't. How would you address that sort of issue?
Yep, good question, and I think in a way it's related to David's response, which I'm sympathetic to, which is that is maintenance of scientific credibility and quality. Because if you lose those things, I think there is genuinely chaos. And I'm also just struck by the fact that we can only ask a few meaningful questions. There's a massive amount of data, but really, for example, if you want to interrogate one of these data sets I was talking about, you can probably only sensibly spend the money and the time asking a couple of questions.
But hold on a second. That's not quite true. If you take some of the big, some of the things that are happening in big data, they're sharing it out. I mean, I don't know how many of you have heard of Galaxy Zoo. So this is a process where they were doing, surveys of the sky, coming up with so much data they didn't know what to do with it, and looking at spiral galaxies and wanting them classified. Do you know this story? And they basically put it out to the crowd and did 30 years' work in a very short space of time by allowing the community to help you crunch big data. Nicholas Gruen's here, who helped to found Kaggle, which put out data modelling challenges to the community. And you've got 14-year-old kids winning prizes about things like HIV, confirmation of the HIV, of the virus, I should say. So
that wasn't what I meant, though, Norman. What I meant was more just the statistical argument that if you want to look for correlations in a formal data set, you can't do it 1,000,000 times, or you will end up with a correlation of 1. So I agree you can farm out analyses and so forth, but you can't take a data set and ask multiple different questions without losing statistical power and confidence and credibility in the quality of the conclusions that you can draw.
Do you agree, David? Because some of this big data stuff is actually making correlations that are surprising.
Sometimes it is, and often the correlations are not surprising. But if we look at data which has a large trend in it, like increasing global temperatures, then you can correlate it with anything else that's also got a large trend in it. So
the classic thing, VCR ownership and...
McDonald's hamburger shops. And it's unclear
I
whether...
always thought that was the core problem.
Well, it could be, but it's unclear whether increasing global temperatures are causing the McDonald's hamburger shops to increase or the sales of ice creams. They're all increasing dramatically. That's the issue, or one of the issues. So it's
spurious correlation.
Spurious correlation, or identifying cause and effect. And that's why, as scientists, we try to look at not just correlation, but relationships in terms of the patterns of change, spatial patterns, temporal patterns of change that allow us to better identify cause and effect. The approach is called fingerprinting, obviously stolen without attribution from criminal investigations, but we look for fingerprints, patterns of changes that help us identify causes.
Kind of undermines your argument for democratization of data, Louise. Yeah. Well, the fact that you can't actually, there's a limit to the democratization of data. These people, it was up to David and Andrew, it wouldn't be out there.
Oh, I don't think that's what they were saying.
I didn't say that. I'm happy for the data.
So is this media misrepresenting you again? Sorry, David, carry on.
Not at all. Media always is very accurate when it quotes me. It's the commentators that I have problems with. But in fact, one of the things that climate change science has tried to do is to make the data openly available, both from observations and from climate model simulations. And in some sense, that's led to some of the, if you like, misrepresentation. Because the data is commonly available, it then gets misused and misrepresented in exactly the sorts of ways that Andrew has been concerned about.
We'll come to the sort of controls on that in a moment, but do you agree with the notion of control?
I agree with the need for literacy. So I think that's the problem. So you get, when data is openly available, it requires a certain level of knowledge of how to actually interpret that data and how to play with it. Because we all know as statisticians that there is that, that famous saying, you can make the data show whatever you want it to. And importantly, especially when we're talking about a political issue such as climate change, we actually don't need to, we don't need to disprove the science. All we need to do is create doubt. And I noticed that you said earlier about it, that the statistics show beyond reasonable doubt. And yet, because people don't understand the nature of how you get to that conclusion of a beyond reasonable doubt, I think it's very easy for the general populace to, you only need that tiny seed of doubt, because that's what the lobbyists trade on, is creating doubt, not actually creating new knowledge at all, or necessarily contradicting that, just doubt.
We'll come to the way through this in a moment. There's a point over here and there's another one over here.
Felix Acker, my question is also to Professor Caroli. As a psychologist, I feel very mollified by your suggestion that it's psychologists and economists that you need in order to take the next step.
Are you up to it?
Absolutely.
Good.
But the point more is psychologists can only have a limited impact in terms of changing people's individual behavior, or better said, people's individual behavior is not the biggest problem that we have. It's more a systemic issue. So it seems to me that the role of psychologists is more to promote the kind of understanding or the attitude change that will then enable us to do global systemic changes. And that's something that's going back to what Joe Rector was saying in terms of what we actually need are people who are marketers, who are promoters, who are able to translate the idea or translate the scientific consensus into something that's understood by the broader populace. Wouldn't you agree?
I completely agree. I've been working with social psychologists at the University of Melbourne and elsewhere on exactly what you're talking about. I wasn't sure if I put up, that we should be using the Gruen transfer to promote action on climate change, whether that would in fact be a positive solution given the ABC moderator, facilitator or not. But yes, you're absolutely right. We need marketers who are much more effective communicators than climate change scientists like myself to provide the arguments, the motivation that will lead to social change. Either that, or we need inspirational community leaders. The Australian Youth Climate Coalition is one of the largest community groups and has attracted an enormous young people's following, because climate change will be much more of a problem for them than for the people whose average age is about mine or older, because they will be surviving, the younger people, through much different climate than what I'll be surviving through.
Can I just add a comment on that? Because I think like the role of psychologists, marketers, and I think there's another role which is increasingly, and it's sort of a new sexy young profession as well, and that's the role of designers. And so especially we're actually going to be running a competition next year, but in regards to health data, but it's something that we see again and again internationally. And so young people who are great at taking, but a boring looking scientific report with just white pages and a whole bunch of black numbers that just wants to send me to sleep, just talking about the general person, and actually making that data look sexy through infographics and visualization. And I think there's a role for those guys to play in association with the scientists, and I'm sure that's working in healthcare as well. And so I think that's a role for designers to play too.
Sure.
And if I may, it's not just about making things look sexy too. Designers play an integral role in actually rethinking an argument and a question. And I guess that we've recently done something. There was a little slide up there during my presentation called the Vic Health Seed Challenge. And instead of running a usual grant round, which we've done, our whole kind of business model, I guess, is based on giving out grants to people and to organisations so they can help us address the incredible wicked problem that we face of non-communicable diseases. But we ran this challenge instead, where we actually encouraged people outside of the usual suspects, as if I can call them that, outside of the health profession, outside of the usual NGOs, to come together to think about the problem of how do we improve fresh fruit and vegetable supply in Victoria. And we got those designers, we got those social innovators to apply, and they've come up with some fantastic ideas, and we're at the moment looking at shortlisting those. So it wasn't just a designer making something look sexy.
They extend beyond the square kilometre around Carlton?
And they absolutely did extend beyond that, all across Victoria, Norman.
Right, at least as far as Doncaster.
Norman, can I just ask, where the tension between scientific credibility and marketing well? Like, who decides where the line is?
It's an excellent point.
I'm not quite sure I understand your point.
I think what we're saying is that, if you like, our more staid approach of let the data speak, do the analysis, deal through regulatory agencies, let them speak about safety and efficacy of new treatments. Part of the proposition is that that's not working very well. And I think that particularly to...
So you're talking about the transition and whether...
The transition and where do you pitch this? Because I would accept that you might relax some of those quality strictures around, as David's saying, suggestion and so forth. But hold on a second,
the pharmaceutical industry has decided this for itself. You put out ads without your drug on it, promoting your latest drug without naming it. You have a happy family relationship and buy Cialis.
Not the company I work for, actually, Norman, but...
I would challenge you that your pharmaceutical company does do it. You've had analyses, for example, of influenza vaccination, which suggests that, in fact, so we're out there promoting it, go and get your immunization, blah, 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 it's going to save lives. But the actual evidence that influenza immunization campaigns reduces morbidity to the extent that the pharmaceutical industry suggests that it does is a myth. There's been analyses out there which suggest that we've been sold a pup.
I don't think that's fair, Norman. As you well know, it varies season to season. It varies as to whether you are, how young you are, whether you've been exposed to like strains of infection or vaccination in the past. It's quite a complex analysis, but I think it's very clear that the meta-analyses that have been done support it as a very powerful, cost-effective public health measure. And in fact, you might have seen in the last 2 weeks, a very unexpected finding, or unexpected from an analysis that was done in Australia, that
About heart attacks.
that suggests that you have a 50% better chance of surviving a heart attack if you'd been vaccinated than not. Now, I'm not defending that analysis. I'm just saying
But
that
the point I'm making
your
here,
statement is...
but the point is the tension
not
here
really
is that industry makes a seamless, and in fact it was partly your question there, makes a seamless transition between data and marketing. But now we're talking about, we're just assuming naturally that there's a much more bumpy transition between non-commercially oriented science and marketing.
I think that the gentleman well, I shouldn't speak for him. I think he was actually talking about other kinds of promotion. I think that the traditional pharmaceutical industry is actually extraordinarily tightly regulated. I think that, and I'm not trying to defend...
But it's not, I mean, I'm not just picking the pharmaceutical industry, but when you've got the marketing machine oiled and you produce data that's got why should you criticize? If it's got a commercial benefit, why wouldn't you use it? And if you're honoring the data, why not? But it's a seamless transition where when you're trying to pull data for another purpose, it becomes bumpy. And you're dealing with this all the time, Gerald.
Well, we do knowledge translation. I guess that's what we really look at, is we take the best possible evidence and then we find a way to communicate that to the general public, to give people the best possible information that they can, is what I would say.
And I'm not coming to the audience as much as I should. Yes.
My question is to the non-climate scientists in the panel. It's actually, if you had the evidence that you have for climate change in your particular fields of expertise, how would you go about promoting a solution
to climate change, or to that equivalent problem?
To their particular interest in their particular field, based on the same evidence that climate change has?
I'll start with Gerald, because there's plenty of evidence. There's the food industry and unhealthy advertising. There's alcohol, which we are chronically unable to do anything about, and the evidence is ample. And the health promotion areas failed miserably in both.
We have failed miserably, and it's actually because I think that you can't use the same arguments for fast food and for alcohol in the same way you can with tobacco. And I think that's been a real struggle of our sector. We know that every single cigarette is doing you damage and can likely kill you. We can't say that about a glass of red wine. We can't actually say that with evidence behind us. And we can't say that about a Big Mac either. So it is actually a difficult argument for the health promotion sector to get across to the community. And we have failed at it. And we are working incredibly hard, I guess, to try and find a way that we can have some messages where the community can strongly think about what it is they're putting in their mouth or they're drinking. Are you drinking too much, and are you drinking too often is probably something we're going to be talking about quite a lot, because the evidence is not as clear.
Yes.
Ben Wills from Coburg Community Health. My question is to Louise. You mentioned the doctor who had, I think it was 500,000 pieces of information, and you asked if anyone had a business model that might help, I don't know, I assume pay him to sift through all of that. And that made me think of a parallel to the music industry and the difficulties that they are facing with open access to information, and the difficulty around how you continue to pay people to create creative content. Do you think that's an issue for the health sector that e-health may bring about? Is that something that you've considered?
Cool. Thanks for the question, Ben. Yeah, it's really fascinating. The main difference between our healthcare systems and healthcare systems in other countries is because we have so much of it government funded, but we also have private funding, obviously, as well. So at the moment, our funding models for your GPs and your specialists in the case of cancer, they get paid because you go in and see them, and they only get paid if you see them under certain conditions as well. So if you want to have a Skype chat, for argument's argument's sake, with your surgeon or someone in your healthcare team, there's actually a small thing for telehealth, but generally that's not going to get paid for. So it actually creates a...
Well, it's not going to get reimbursed.
Well, it's not going to get reimbursed.
The person's free to charge for it.
That's right. But it's very rare that we actually do have too many people, at this stage anyway, too many clinicians actually adopting that business model. I think that will change though. But even when we go down that route, the problems with that is that if I'm willing to, see people, as a clinician, see different people in a variety of different formats and say, wow, you've got 500,000 bits of information for me to sort through, I'd really love to help you to do that, but that is going to take me X amount of time, just for argument's sake. You're not going to have the funds to pay me for that time. So we actually don't have very nice business models around that. One of the things that we do have though is, and it's working for a lot of scientific research, is that crowdsourcing idea as well. So, for instance, there's a lot of companies based on gamification. So there's one that they need to sequence RNAs, and so they made a game out of it. And apparently, and I saw the guy give a talk at Stanford last year, and he was saying literally he's got 20-year-olds solving scientific problems that they've been puzzling scientists and biologists for years and years and years, and because they've made a game out of it. So certainly I think there are creative ways that we can look at how do we manage this data and how do we make it useful and meaningful for people. But it isn't elegant at this stage.
How can you even start when we've spent probably nearly $1 billion on a personally controlled electronic health record? I think to date 600,000 people have registered, but of those 600,000, only 4,000 have actually put any meaningful medical information on their personally controlled electronic health record. You'd be better giving them a check.
Well, it depends. I don't have very much information on my personally controlled electronic health record, and I think that's fantastic because I haven't been sick in the last 12 months. So, my record is relatively empty. My sister, who just had a baby...
But hold on a second. Part of the issue here, and it comes to design. We've designed a personally controlled electronic health record, one could argue, to suit the privacy lobby, to suit doctors, but not necessarily to suit patients. It's a whole series of compromises where if you'd actually had true co-design, we actually might have a functional electronic health record which is gathering data and actually is useful for the healthcare system and individuals.
Yeah, and look, that's a fair enough criticism as well. And the reason that for the limitations, I guess, of where the personally controlled electronic health record is now, a lot of it is actually to do with timeframes. So, it was back when Rudd was Prime Minister the first time
Well, you've got
round.
until Saturday.
Well, it was when he was Prime Minister first time round and he made a budget announcement, and when the people were awarded the contracts to actually build this thing, they had less than 11 months to do that. That's the sort of thing if someone said, and I travel a lot internationally and I always
But during
say...
the Health Informatics Society, I mean, they haven't even put it properly onto medical information systems sitting on hospital desks.
Yeah. And it's a problem. I mean, I would love the problem that David has of his information is getting twisted in the media and that type of... I'd be so excited. I think this is one of... I tell you what, this is one of the first times that health informatics is getting discussed outside in an event that isn't actually a healthcare-related event. So we have opposite problems there.
We had a comment in the middle here that somebody here was wanting to say something. Doesn't help. Yeah.
Hello, Matt DeBroner from the University of Melbourne. So all of you have spoken that misrepresentation of data is a big problem, and definitely anyone with a Facebook account and some data they pulled out from anywhere can make a story, and even the media can help facilitate this poor representation. So how would you, as people who have the data and know it, help the public to actually make an informed decision and critically analyze this data they have?
Andrew and then David.
It's a really good question, and it was really the basis, I guess, of my supposed to be the basis of my short presentation, which is that I think it's really about being clear what questions you'd like to ask, what are the really most important burning questions, and then working with professionals about the organisation of the database and how you access and what tools you use and all of those technical things.
So that sounds great, but Roche were asked not by just the general members of the public, they were asked by members of the Cochrane Collaboration, eminent researchers, to release their data about Tamiflu, the drug, because they wanted to interrogate the data to look at its efficacy. So this is not mad stuff. This is not saying, does Tamiflu cause cancer? This is, does it do what you say it's going to do? Because governments around the world are going to spend squillions of dollars on your drug, and they resist it.
Yep.
Who is going to be the police person in this
Well,
process?
I can say you're right, and I'm not speaking for Roche, but I think that I think it is coming. I think it will come. If you look at the European Medicines Agency, they released on the 24th of June,
kicking and screaming,
a big draft document detailing how in the future there will be public access to this sort of data. I would add, it's sort of interesting to me, the proposal currently is that it would only be available to European investigators, which is kind of interesting. But
does that mean you have to be white?
No comment, Norman. But it's coming. It's definitely coming. And I won't attempt to. It's worth a look. There is an executive summary, but if people are interested, it actually lays out the agency's proposal for how you would check the bona fides of the investigator and what tools they would use, what questions they want to ask. But it's coming.
David?
I think there will be.
I think there are, if you like, multiple aspects. I mean, yes, it's a really good question. One of the really important things is to have a well-informed community who are literate in a range of topics that are relevant to whatever question is being asked. So it means medically literate if it's health-related matters. If it's science, then it's science literacy. Climate is something that everyone knows about. Everyone has an opinion about the weather because everyone's interested. But actually understanding climate or understanding climate change is something that is not as important as just understanding science in terms of science literacy and science approaches. So I would have said that that's the critically important thing. And then there's one other thing, and that is that it's important when the community or anyone reads, whether it's a Facebook blog or it's a newspaper article, considers the interests of whoever's writing it and the interests of whoever is commenting. That disclosure of interest is critically important and is often hidden.
So what's Bjorn Lomborg's disclosure? What would he have to say?
Bjorn Lomborg has an interesting background and a wide range of opinions on matters. He's changed his opinions in terms of the reality of climate change science. He now says, yes, climate change is happening, but it's in terms of the question that I raised before, the lesser of two evils. He's said that it is better not to address climate change, but to spend the money on addressing the impacts of climate change than reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
So more bricks on the dike.
And other responses to climate change. The really difficult issue is that you need an awful lot of bricks to cope with climate change impacts over the next 1,000 years. You need to keep making those bricks in a way that doesn't generate greenhouse gas emissions, which means you're not making bricks in the normal way. They produce carbon dioxide when you make bricks.
Multi-metaphors going at the same time here, but yeah, I can deal with it. Yes.
Hi, my question's for Dr. Schaefer. It's clear that as we enter into the age of big data that we need electronic healthcare records, and that even though they've got some very vocal critics that the personally controlled records should not be forgotten about just yet, and we should invest more time into them. We mentioned before that after a year we've seen with the numbers that the uptake's going quite poorly and not as highly as we would have liked. What is stopping something like an opt-out system from happening? We've seen before with things like organ donation as a public health initiative that with an opt-out system it's clearly a huge benefit. And I was just wondering if you think that with the current opt-in system, if it can really ever succeed.
Great question, thank you. Before the PCHR was a thing, when we were just talking about having electronic health records available for you to access your own health information and to share it with those that you deemed appropriate, there was a lot of discussion about opt-in versus opt-out. And for those of you who don't know, yes, what was decided was it was an opt-in. So you have to actively go, yes, I want one of those. And we also are now relying on mostly doctors, let's face it, and they're overworked anyway, to actually take in their 6-minute consultation time to talk to you about the joys of the personally controlled electronic health record. It's a bit tough for them. They're doing
And
it tough
enter the
already.
data.
Yeah, that's right. But and this is just my personal opinion, but been around for a while. I actually think that we would never have an opt-out system, and that's because as soon as you start talking about that, people want to start talking about the Australia card and the Access card and all of that sort of stuff, and that idea of there's going to be government creep. And so I actually think, just personally, that was one of the reasons that wasn't adopted, because we actually do have proof, and
But the reality
other countries
was,
that's actually a much better way of going about it.
the reality was our so-called leaders ran for cover and refused to provide leadership on it.
Absolutely. And I'm actually really surprised, as I spend more and more time as a leader myself and associating with other leaders, how many people don't even know what leadership is, and they have leadership positions. And it's your last day of this festival is around the democracy, and the idea of our leadership has been it's a rush to the bottom, and that we see that in the political debate, and we see it through everything that people here care about. It's disappointing, to say the least.
Got quite a few tweets that have come in. How can we bring all children into the information flow as future voting citizens and leaders, Gerald? How do we bring children into this information flow as future voting citizens and leaders?
Well, I think some of the ways potentially that could happen is around what Louise was talking about before, gamification. It might seem like a long bow, but young kids can actually help us address some of the problems by the way that they think about the world and the way that they interact with technology. I think that for young kids to be able to express their views, for them to be able to not just be picking up messages from big marketers and retweeting those messages from big marketers because they think that message from McDonald's is a really good thing that their friends might like, that they can actually become quite literate in understanding and being discerning about what information is coming to them would be really good. I think for Vic Health, we're certainly looking at how young people can become involved in debate in a much stronger way. And without giving too much away, you'll know more about that in the future.
Can I ask you, it's an unusual question to ask an audience in the meeting these days, is to turn on your mobile phones, but have them on mute, because we'll need to use them in a moment. So if you've turned them off, which is really being a good corporate citizen, can you actually turn them back on? Because we actually need them. I'm just going to go through a couple of other tweets, quite interesting. One is climate change will be solved when it becomes an economic opportunity, not a problem. But it already is an economic opportunity, but it seems to have been ignored in the debate.
You're absolutely right. There are many, many ways that reframing climate change can really help it to be accepted. And climate change is an economic opportunity. Australia is blessed with more sunshine than any other country. It has major adverse health impacts, and I've studied that in terms of UV radiation and skin cancer. But the sunlight that Australia receives gives it the greatest potential as a solar energy resource of any country in the world. One of the issues is no one owns the sun. However, someone does own the coal that's in the ground, and they put in big marketing campaigns to dig it up and burn it as quickly as possible. There is money to be made in using the sun to generate electricity and to store it and sell that energy. And so there are big economic opportunities. There's economic opportunities in many other low carbon energy solutions. There's also money to be made in energy efficiency solutions, in new transport solutions. One of the issues...
But what's not happened is the disruption.
Most people would say that the Black Saturday bushfires were a major disruption. Most people...
But I mean the market disruption, like the motor car from the horse and cart.
Yep.
The train from the horse and cart.
There is a significant financial investment in fossil fuel industries and in their reserves. 80% of the known fossil fuel reserves need to stay in the ground if we are to achieve the internationally agreed target of not exceeding 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels of global warming. 80% of the assets of many of the current fossil fuel industries are stranded assets. The economic disruption that you're talking about will occur either in a gentle way or in an unmanaged way when people in this audience and many other retirees discover that their superannuation has been invested with stranded assets that will become worthless. 80% of their assets in fossil fuel companies will become worthless or are already worthless.
Interesting thoughts. Fred, last question.
I'd like to ask.
Can we just get that microphone quickly to Professor Mendelsohn? Thanks.
After 30 years of speaking the truth forthrightly, how do you keep your good humour going when faced by such colossal global stupidity?
Why don't you just say what you really think, Fred?
And well, I guess that's a facetious question of yours. And even when Norman said that it's all your fault for not doing a better job in communicating. But the real question is, this clearly is a catastrophic failure of democracy when the interests of all the people in this room are secondary to a fairly small number of minors. How do we conquer that?
Well, there's been lots of discussion about the importance or otherwise of democracy. It's a flawed system, but no one's come up with a better one yet, and I know that's a saying that's been used over and over again. It is clear that when the community decides that action on climate change is important, then action will be accelerated. There are already commitments from all the political parties to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. They're just not fast enough. It will be the community that determines the speed at which those actions take place. The difficulty with climate change is that it's like a very slow cancer that creeps up on you. It affects someone else, or solving it is someone else's problem. It's very easy for all of us to say it's up to someone else to fix it. And yet, as I said before, Australia is the developed country most at risk from the adverse impacts of climate change. At the same time as Australia is the highest emitter per person, the highest per capita contributor to climate change and its growing problem. This cognitive dissonance about climate change and its solutions is all pervasive, except that the politicians are happy to ignore it.
I'm saying you've got till Saturday. I want you to vote now, because you've heard 4 propositions, and we're going to take one of these forward. There's a bit of melding here, so we might do a bit of creative stuff after the meeting. But essentially, Louise's proposition is that data should be publicly available with very few caveats. It was an interesting tweet which we didn't get to, which was some of the most useful data, but Andrew was alluding to it, is actually in private hands. What do we do with that? How do we release that? And Andrew's proposition is privately held clinical data should be made available to a broader community of legitimate, responsible researchers to improve public health outcomes. David's is that science alone is not enough to overcome the vested interests misrepresenting climate change science and needs the support of a broader community, again, psychologists, economists, and community and business leaders. And Gerald's proposition is health promotion 21st century style. Creating and sharing knowledge is no longer enough to promote healthy lifestyles. We need to kickstart conversations and provide people with the tools to actively collaborate with science expertise. So here's the way we're going to do this. There's a phone number which will come up on the screen as I speak, I hope. That's the phone number. If you're listening online and you're overseas, it's +61 429 883 481 or 0429 883 481. That's the message, that's the number to text to. And you've only got one vote, which is if you go with Louise's proposition, that's the number. For those online, it's 519-792. If you're going with Andrew's, it's 519-793. And if you're going with David's, it's 519-794. That's what you text. And for Gerald's, it's 519-795. And you've got 2 minutes.
Louise, I think we should stop. Unanimous winner.
We're rocketing to high numbers here.
This is like watching paint dry.
This is democratization and democracy of... So the numbers are high, it's difficult. So Louise's, the text number is 0429 883 481. 0429 883 481.
Haven't I got any friends in
Hey, wait, do you want to borrow my
Here we
phone?
go. Well done, Andrew.
there?
You can use my phone.
No, thanks.
Oh, they must be my friends. You can collect the payment afterwards.
I think it's Telstra that's getting the payment. So we'll keep going for another 30 seconds. And we'll stop now. I think that climate change, David's proposition, is the one that's the clear winner that we'll take forward. Last minute, here we go. I thought that climate change might win is obviously too much for some people. So the climate change proposition is the one that we'll go through to the Democracy Day, but I think that in amongst the three presentations between Louise, Andrew and Gerald are very important ideas. I'm not just saying that because they're here. They are actually. My goodness. Misrepresentation by the media yet again. Fantastic. But it's still climate change out in front. But I think that in that whole democratization of data, the use of private data in healthcare, and how you actually open that up to intelligent uses, and how far you democratize is a very important idea that we will confront on the last day of the Festival of Ideas. Could you please join me in thanking our fantastic panelists? Thank you to the team at the University of Melbourne and the Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Centre for making tonight possible. I look forward to you and the 500 people that each of you know to come along to the Festival of Ideas, and I look forward to meeting you then. The opening is on the 1st of February and it goes from the 2nd till the 6th. Please come and tell all your friends, and thank you for coming tonight. October, what did I say? October.